This time I've chosen a very complex, very wonderful, very, I would say, sacred archetype to deal with. The wolf. Canis lupus, the grey wolf or the timber wolf, who shared our human infancy and childhood with us, when we were both apex predators in the days, the long since past days of the late Pleistocene, some 40,000 years ago, a long time ago. The wolf that we probably cohabited with at that time was the megafaunal wolf, a vast wolf as big as the largest grey wolf that you get today, but built more like a hyena than a wolf, with a vast skull, very dense bone structure. You can imagine hunting mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, the giant auroch at that time, the huge elk with their vast antlers. Brave creatures, creatures that hunted with strategy and tactics, very much akin to ourselves. So here we were as apex predators, and so closely entwined and entangled together that we became, as it were, psychic siblings. If we can think of that term, a psychic sibling. But as with all siblings, rivalry develops. And there was, of course, rivalry between these two groups of fighters and hunters. Fighters and hunters is a good term to think of when thinking of the wolf, because that it also shares with us. It has its strategy, it has its tactics, it has its pack, it has its regiments, its battalions. So it parallels very much our life. And it is quite remarkable how similar the social and hierarchical structures of wolf pack life is compared with that of Homo sapiens. But here we have a creature that has stayed a faithful and loving child of nature, who at the full moon lifts its head in salute to the heavens and to the celestial body that symbolizes the goddess to which it owes allegiance. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the goddess of wild, unspoilt places. In speaking of this incredible remedy, because of the psychic capacity to absorb the suffering of humanity, which we even see in the distorted wolf picture of Lyson, this particular psychic empathy and compassion for others, where we see in the Lyson picture that one can pick up exactly what another person is feeling and experiencing. So we have the wolf picking up what is going on in humanity, and what is going on in humanity as opposed to this innocent, wonderful creature. We have become literally an infestation on the surface of Gaia. And the wolf has paid the price. We also have paid a price in losing the wolf because of this closeness between the two of us. Now in Bath in 2000, the millennium, I spoke of lac caninum. And at the time I spoke about it as a very important archetype akin to carcinosin. The left-right, right-left sweep of its symptoms, indicating an umbrella-like position in the materia medica. We speak of these hierarchies in human living, hierarchy in animal life, and particularly in the wolf pack. Hierarchy is very important. So this hierarchical living is a very important aspect. It is also something we can take over into the homeopathic materia medica. And I hope you all have a hierarchy, that you see remedies, shall we say, the lesser peaks, and behind that the high mountains of silica, of lachesis, and so forth, and the smaller remedies that we use. But if we have to think of the great overarching remedies, those which have this left to right sweep of their symptoms show the immense ambit of their function and their reach. And this is so of all the lac remedies. Lac caninum, carcinosin, of course, stands right up at the top, and then lac caninum, lac lupinum, and all the other lacs. I mentioned the similarity between this remedy and sepia, Bellis perennis, folliculinum, and how they appeared, along with Lycopodium, in that important rubric, particularly with regard to the wolf. Ailments from a long history of domination by others. And if we look at the world today, in many, many aspects of life on this planet, ailments from long history of domination. It is a very important rubric. What a poor little rubric it is. How few remedies appear in it. And we can add to that. It needs to be added to. And lac lupinum should appear in that rubric. Just think of the long continued persecution of the wolf by humanity. The culling that has taken place and still takes place today, cruelly, with the use of strychnine, traps, shooting, all manner of persecutions have been the animal has been exposed to. The importance of the remedy became apparent to me quite some time ago. At the time I spoke about lac caninum, I was not as familiar with lac lupinum as I am today. The first thing that attracted my attention to it was, first of all, the importance of lac caninum itself. Surely, along with carcinosin and staphysagria, one of the most important remedies that we use for cases of abuse, for victimization. And I recall one awful week that I had in practice, where in that time I saw no less than 3 women, new patients coming to me who had suffered sexual abuse in their youth. So that was the first factor that attracted my attention. The second point was the closeness of the relationship between these sister species. Lac lupinum must have more to it than one possibly knows from a superficial understanding of it or an interest in the natural history of the wolf. Sister species because it would seem that there is an ancestral wolf from which these 2 species deviated, more or less at the same time, probably about 40 to 27,000 years ago. So they're sister species. So that has got to be important. The third factor was this fear that seems to permeate society. All manner of cultures having this tremendous fear of the wolf, which is utterly inexplicable. It is not understandable. Why this fear? Because we have nothing to fear from the wolf. The full wolf has every reason to fear us. Then the ancient rivalry, of course, between ourselves and the wolf, way back in the Pleistocene, so important. Another factor, its original vector role in transmitting the deadly virus of rabies. And the fact that rabies simulates the beast or Lucifer principle within the depths of the psyche. Something which we first see stirring when that young child develops a Solanaceae fever, be it a belladonna, be it a stramonium, be it a hyoscyamus, where we see literally the vital force going into the depths of the psychic abyss and lifting out, always from within outwards, get rid of this evil, malicious, malevolent energy. When we speak of these things, and when I spoke about it many years ago, the world was a quieter place, and it seemed that Uncle David was probably waxing too eloquent on these matters of the Lucifer principle within the psyche. But sit in Aleppo and just be a wolf there, a human wolf, in that situation. And you'll know that the beast principle is alive and out and about. Now that was important to me, that rabies and the wonderful Solanaceae remedies which have such a deep affinity for the darkest and most obscure regions of the human psyche. And here we have the wolf as the main vector. The others are more lookalikes of the wolf that convey the coyote, the dog, and so forth and so on. But most important is the wolf itself. And then, probably most of all, if I have to look back to my childhood, and I'm sure your childhood, in the Northern Hemisphere, Little Red Riding Hood, the big bad wolf. In other words, the dark aspect of the wolf, which is found in all cultures. Why? This wonderful animal, why do we put it into the trappings of villain always? Cunning, sly, wily, not to be trusted. Why? So I started investigating it and I started using it. And I found myself very much like Donald Frubister. I worked with him in the early 1960s when he was infused with the carcinosin picture. It was all he could think about. It was all he could talk about. He was prescribing it left, right and centre, a most important remedy. And I, a young man, I was no more than 24 at the time, sitting there beside him at outpatients in the dungeon section of the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, as it was then. I like that word, homeopathy. And he would expound on it, and I sat there next to him and I thought, gosh, a bee in the bonnet maybe. And then later, of course, I realized what a gem of a remedy it placed in my hands. This wonderful remedy that has such deep import. A remedy, ultimately, you keep it behind your back sometimes as a noserd, and then sometimes as the central core constitutional remedy, but then putting in a dose of carcinosin here, a dose of carcinosin there, and you see the remedy increasing its capacity to heal. Such a one is lac lupinum. Lac lupinum is complex, hugely psychic, picking up from humanity all that humanity suffers and building into its complex shape this Mercury. Mercury, a trickster, like the sly wolf of Little Red Riding Hood. Mercury is there in me. Each of these remedies, anacardium that is fighting this evil within him, the beast principle, anacardium is there. Each of the remedies, almost as if it's being projected onto the wolf, and that is precisely what it's about. Projection. Taking all that is malicious, all that is wicked, all that is evil and vile within ourselves, not owning it, rejecting it, suppressing it into the shadow, and that which is sent into the shadow is then projected outwards. And whom do we project it upon? Who other than the one we grew up with, that was out there with us, hunting the mammoth, hunting the woolly rhinoceros, our psychic sibling. This is so important for us to realize, because how frequently do we as homeopaths come upon a case that just simply will not move? We seem to have it all tied up. The symptoms match, and we use it, and there is an initial response, and there's an improvement. We've been accurate sufficiently to bring that about. And then it peters out. And you change potency, and it improves for a while, and it peters out. And then you go down in potency, you go up in potency, you bring in a bowel nosode, you bring in your miasmatic nosodes. Oh, the proving of lac lupinum. Melissa Asselin did the first proving, Melissa Asselin. And then Nancy Herrick did the second proving in the 1990s, 1996 or 8 I think it was, that it came out. Animal Mind, Human Voices. What a lovely title of a book. And in that she says, she was amazed at the number of powerful themes which developed within the proving, more than she had ever experienced in any other remedy that she had developed. Secondly, that there were so many strong feelings, emotions, and dreams, dreams, dreams and dreams that came up. And in fact, I found that possibly only emerald and magnesium carbonate, which are of course for the love chakra, green, mag-carb, the green of Mother Nature, magnesium. And then emerald itself, which embodies the love that Mother Nature has, the great goddess for Gaia and for the wolf. These remedies are so closely knit together. Just speaking of this, the ancients, the alchemists, saw there was a connection between the metal, the element Mercury, the planet Mercury, and the god Mercury. But thinking in analytical, psychological terms, we don't speak of Mercury, speak of Hermes. Hermes. This small planet, which is closest to the sun, spins around at a very rapid pace, which was in keeping with the nature of Hermes, who had winged sandals, a winged helmet because of his nimble wit, his very sharp mind that could penetrate into anything, and he was quick to move around. He was the messenger of the gods. And they saw that there was a link between this, because what was the sun but the celestial representation of the god of gods, the almighty god? In Egypt it would have been Ra. And there was this small planet going faster than any other in the night sky, attentive to it, vigilant for it, going round and round. In classical Greek mythology, it was the all-seeing eye of Zeus, or the radiant embodiment of his son, Phoebus Apollo. And then this little planet spinning round, the messenger of the gods, Nuntius, the sun wolf, they called it. In other words, wolf of the sun. Wolf the sun, Nuntius, means messenger. It means also envoy. In other words, the being who brings to earth the message, design and intent of the creation into and onto planet Earth, to bring it about, to take souls through dimensions from the living state into the afterlife state, and from the afterlife state into the next life state, ushering them. Always accompanied by wolves. We need to know which deities from our ancestors were seen to be always accompanied by the wolf. And from those deities, knowing them, you can incorporate their attributes as the ancients saw them, their attributes, their nature, their qualities, incorporated into the wolf. So the wolf comes as a messenger from high, from another dimension, bringing to earth the design of the Creator. If we have any doubt about that, just read about what happened in the Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone National Park, just as with all wild areas throughout the world, the wolf has been destroyed, eliminated. When those who love wolves would bring them back, always the farmers around the area complain, and always they set snares, they poison and they kill. This is repeatedly done. Yellowstone, no wolves. No wolves, apex predator gone. Control over the ecosystem gone. With the absence of the wolves, the elk multiply. The elk overbrowse on the wonderful young willow trees, on the aspen and on the cottonwood trees. And these trees are vital for the beaver populations. And so when the wolves disappeared, the beavers in Yellowstone Park were reduced to one small colony. That was all, to support this vast area. Vital. The cascade effect of the reintroduction of the wolf into Yellowstone Park has brought about miraculous changes. Now the predator pressure upon the elk breaks them up into small groups. They also have to keep on the move, so overbrowsing of the willows has been reduced. With that, of course, they've recovered. The stands of willow trees are abundant. The beavers are back. Now there are at least 9 colonies, and there are going to be more in the future. What do the beavers do? They build dams. What do dams do? They create a water system. The water system brings in silt, nutrient-rich, draining into the rest of the landscape. It changes the directions of rivers and streams. It spreads the water widely. In the areas, the waterlands, what do we find? An abundance of fish, abundance of snakes, amphibians, insects, plants rejuvenating. And when the dams break up, then we find where there was water, there is now lush meadows filled with rich vegetation, all because of the wolves. And this has been a regeneration, a rebirth of the Yellowstone Park. Hold on to that image and that energy and know that it is within that little bottle that you've got. That bottle of Laclupinum 200, the messenger of the gods, the Nuntius the Sun Wolf, that brings down that energy, that creative intelligence that can change the planet. Kill the good wolf, and the evil wolf will flourish. And that is what has happened, because there is such a close affinity between ourselves and the wolf. So dreams come out in the proving of a wolf. And these dreams, particularly of animals, and this I've proved time and time again, give wolf to a patient and very soon they start to dream of animals. And most of these animals have totem significance. They're like familiars. And each one of them has a particular significance. I cannot emphasize the need for dream analysis in homeopathic prescribing. It is a vital part of our work. When I speak in myth, the myth is always a universal dream. And the dream of your patient is a personal myth. And that myth is encoded. It is in parable form. It needs to be unraveled. It must be approached with reverence and understanding. And so often it will point the way to your next remedy. Invariably. So animals come up. Most interesting is that the bear significantly appears in dreams of Laclupinum. Now, that may not mean anything to you if you think that the wolf lives in the northern hemisphere, in the snowy areas, high tundra. That is where we're going to find it. Bears are common to the wolf. But repeated bear dreams, there are many other animals, bears particularly, are significant. The bear is sacred, again, to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. Here again we have then a connection between the wolf and Artemis. What does Artemis mean to us? She has a silver bow. She has silver arrows. That means to me a significant connection with Argentum. Argentum, not raped Argentum, which is Argentum nitricum, but Argentum. Argentum, the central essence of Argentum, is the free, noble, proud, all wolf terms, free, noble, proud, independent, feminine principle. It's the moon. The wolf howls to the moon. It is the feminine principle which it owes allegiance to. It is the free, noble, independent, proudly independent, feminine principle which is so important to the wolf's dynamic. That independence which requires no advice, encouragement, or approval from the masculine principle, sufficient unto herself. A very important aspect of the wolf. And the fighting for that. Now, if we think of the wolf as a warrior, which it is, the woman who is Laclupinum is so connected with her femininity and the importance of it being honored and respected that she will even fight for it. She can be militant about it. And so we see here an indication that sepia is closely connected to Laclupinum. And if we look at that rubric, ailments from a long history of domination, sepia is there, and how it is there. And what remedies become hardened and become more masculine? They're fighting for the feminine, the rights of the feminine, but in doing so they become militant and they become masculine. That masculinization process which can take place. Corsican? I would think so. Ignatia? Most distinctly so. Natramur, Ignatia, Sepia, are they not like this? So this group of remedies, and lac lupinum, have that tendency, and the defending of the feminine principle is hugely important to them. So many dreams of many animals, the bear being important. And just as it holds these totem animals, it holds within its matrix numerous polycrests. Norse mythology. This was so important to me as well in studying lac lupinum, was the importance of the wolf to the Norsemen and the ancient Germanic tribes. And I think most of us here derive from those groups of people. We come from them. The wolf was extremely important to their mythology. The wolf was seen as being sacred to Odin, father of gods, the almighty God. But what was their impression of the wolf? And what were the stories they told about the wolf? On the one hand, it was seen as being courageous, victorious, noble, fierce, but noble. And that was the prime feeling about it. But they didn't write of that in their stories, did they? When we hear of Fenrir and his ilk and his brood, these were evil, quite vile creatures. So we have on the other side, it is an ambivalence which we see, a paradoxical picture, which is so characteristic of lac lupinum. There is the good and the bad. We do tend to approach the wolf from a very sentimental viewpoint. I think more and more as one enters into homeopathy and such disciplines, you are obviously moving into a green viewpoint of life. And we see then the wolf as a very wonderful creature, but our ancestors did not. And they then, of course, projected their own dark side onto the wolf. It was seen as malevolent, as ferocious, as cruel, as cunning, and as wicked. It was seen as the embodiment of malevolence. It was seen as the picture of demonic obsession, equated with Satan himself. Ferocious, insatiable, and utterly, unimaginably evil and dark. And that is how the wolf was portrayed. And of course that's crept down into our own fairy stories with Little Red Riding Hood. Now it's immediately apparent that this dread picture is totally in contrast with the reality. So where on earth does it come from? The projection that I've spoken of. Taking what you reject within ourselves, what we suppress into the shadow, that then becomes warped energy which is projected outwards with that effect. People who've lived with the wolves found them to be wonderful creatures, and as I said, particularly very, very family orientated and highly socialized. But the scapegoating of the wolf goes back really thousands of years. So looking through the ancient tracts, I wanted to find out, where did this all start? If there's one thing that fascinates the youth today, and Hollywood indeed, it's stories about werewolves and vampires. And these, of course, color our deep subconscious thinking. You grow up with these stories like we did with Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden imprinting upon us a suspicion about the female principle, that it is treacherous, that it is in league with the serpent. And how, right from the start, the very first little fairy story that we hear about is Little Red Riding Hood. But going back into the ancient text, I came to Hesiod's writing, and he speaks of a certain king, a king of Arcadia, known as Lycaon, L-Y-K-A-O-N. In Shakespeare's words, he was a remorseless, lecherous, treacherous, kindless villain. He was all of that. And his prodigality led to him having 50 sons, all of them as evil as he, except the youngest, Nyctimos, who was a gentle, feminine kind of boy. And he had one daughter, a very exquisitely beautiful daughter called Callisto. This villainous Lycaon invited the great god Zeus to table, and there clandestinely served up for him human flesh, the ultimate sacrilege. And it is said that he did this out of rage for the fact that Zeus had violated or had seduced his daughter Callisto, or as a test to see, was Zeus truly a god? Obviously, Zeus was not misled, deceived by this unholy offering, turned over the tables in immense wrath, and the fleeing Lycaon was turned into a wolf. That I found rather impelling and rather powerful. But look at this depiction of what happened on that occasion. The first instance of the lycanthrope emerging, the werewolf. He subsequently destroyed all the other sons, the sons at least, with a thunderbolt, or changed them all into wolves. So the punishment fitted the crime. At that early age, and we're talking about 750 to 650 BC, already they were seeing that villainy in humans, at the full moon, as the story tells us, at the full moon, again, Luna, the moon, Artemis, Silver, all come into play. I've almost extended my welcome, and I have so much to tell you about this incredible animal, in which case I will just cut it short and keep to the myths, because this is rather important. Where was I now?
Villainy in humans.
No matter, let me have a look.
It turned all the sons into wolves. So where villainy?
Yes, the punishment was in keeping with the crime. That's all right. Anyway, just to wrap that one up, the name Lycaon and the fact of serving up your own son minced to the god. Which one of our archetypes would we think of? And we're given a prompt by the name itself, Lycaon. Isn't Lycopodium quite capable and very inclined, in fact, to exalt himself by dragging others down? And very often his own offspring. He's known as the devouring father. The devouring father. You bring your report to him, you've got 90%, and he's interested in where did the extra 10% disappear to? How come is that not present here? The one who can deliver up his son minced. Within the myth, there is ancient analytical psychology at work. We see the abuse of the feminine principle within it. Zeus, Callisto, the young Nyctimos, the one who is served up, is of a feminine, gentle type. Now, if we go deeper into the Norseman's mythology of the wolf, we find two characters emerging. Odin, the god of gods. He was the father, the all-father of Asgard. In other words, no matter how mighty the other gods might be, they served him as children. He was the one who created heaven and earth and the sky and all that is between them. The poetic Edda gives to you a wonderful itinerary and a litany of his omnipotence, his great power. So we have that within the wolf. His urge, his lifelong urge, was to achieve wisdom. And as you will remember possibly if you've learnt Norse mythology, he had lost one eye, which he had sacrificed in his search for wisdom. He pledged an eye that he might have wisdom. The wisdom that he received increased an even greater urge, because that wisdom told him that there was more wisdom to be attained. And it was he who went to Yggdrasil, the great cosmic tree that holds together the 9 kingdoms of the Norse cosmos, the 9 levels, the 9 spheres. And there he hung himself. He hung himself in the tree. He impaled himself in the side with a spear, mixing his blood with the dew dropping from the tree, entering into the cosmic cycle, and took up the runes, the wisdom of the runes, into his being, the wisdom of the runes. So wisdom, huge wisdom in the wolf. Accompanying Odin is the raven. And the raven and the wolf, again, archetypes that you can bring together. If you're studying wolf, study raven. And raven, he would send out his 2 ravens every morning, and they would quarter the earth and bring back to him at eventide all the news of what had transpired in the world. That is intellect, that is knowledge. So raven stands particularly for knowledge, whereas the wolf stands for wisdom. The opposite energy in Norse mythology was an evil fellow called Loki, which you must have heard of. He was wily, he was extremely cunning, and he was an outsider to the family of the Aesir, the leading family of gods that lived in Asgard. Something that creeps up repeatedly in provings of wolf is the sense of being one apart, an intruder, an outcast, somebody who is not taken in and who is ostracized. It's a feeling that they have in different ways, but a very definite and powerful one. Loki was a force unto himself. He owed allegiance to no one. And he hated anything that was noble, anything that was elevated, anything that was pure and virtuous, he hated. And there was a god of such a character, Balder, Balder the Good, the hero god of the Norse people. And this villainous Loki cunningly planned his downfall and death, and ultimately that he should not be released from hell, that he should remain in hell, condemned to hell. The gods were in a fury about this, that this should have happened. And they conspired together, caught him, and bound him. Here I'll have to go into a myth quickly because time is so short, I'm sorry. The story of Loki is important. When he was caught, he was taken. Let's do the catching of Loki first. Loki realized when he had killed Balder that he was in dire trouble, that the wrath of the gods would fall upon him. He changed himself into a salmon and silently slipped into an icy cold river and hid in whirlpools and crevices and rocks under Franang's falls. The ravens, of course, saw him do this and told Odin, and Odin sent the gods of Asgard to pursue him and catch him. And they fashioned a net, and this net was something designed and created by Loki himself. And it was a wide-weighted net, and they began to drag the river near Franang's falls and under the rocks to catch Loki. And every time they almost got him, he would hide away between the rocks, or he would leap over the net and escape. Eventually Thor, the man with a hammer, an iron hammer, iron, wolf, and the color red are very close. I have to sandwich this, unfortunately, into this story because there's so much you need to follow up yourselves. The color red, the understanding of the archetypology of red, the characteristics of red, what it means to be a red person. Red. Next, red hemoglobin, Little Red Riding Hood, red, first chakra, red, the foundation, the start of the individuation path. This is all to do with wolf, the start of the journey. and the wolf is there to help us achieve it. So red, iron, and the wolf, take those three together. They are yang, and they indicate the yang masculine principle. In the system, too much wolf, too much red, too much iron, too much masculine, aggression, cruelty, and destruction, which we see everywhere. Too little wolf, too little red, too little iron, too little masculine, weakness, defenselessness, inefficiency. So red, very important, wolf, important, and iron. Study them together. Some remedies need to be studied in tandem, and these three particularly do. So quickly, to wrap it up, my time is short. To wrap it up, oh, damn it. It is so intriguing. Anyway, he slipped into the waters and they caught him finally. Thor, the iron god, it was fitting that it was he who did it. And remember, with iron, you're dealing with, never mind. So they caught him. Finally, Thor got hold of him, grabbed him, and they took him to a dark and dreary cave. And they brought to the cave his two sons, evil sons they were, Narvi and Vivali, and his wife, his second wife, a very, very gentle and virtuous woman. The anger of the gods and the evil of the two sons came together by projection, obviously, and brought about a transformation, something such as we've seen here. Vali suddenly turned into a wolf, a maddened wolf, ripped out the throat of his brother, Narvi, disemboweled him, and then, red-fanged, bolted from the cave. That story goes on, because it's like a teaser in a television series. You know that Vali's still out there. Vali, the accomplice of the ego self and the dangers of the ego self. This I must complete. When this had happened, the gods took hold of the intestines of poor old Narvi, and they bound Loki to the rocks of the cave. And as these hardened, they became like bands of steel about him so that he couldn't move. But this was not enough. More punishment was due to this Loki. Skadi in ancient Norse means harm. Or, in Old Gothic, it means shadow. Skadi, Skaduvir in Afrikaans. She came in with a huge serpent, and she hung the serpent above Loki, so that the venom from its fangs would drip eternally on his face, causing him extreme anguish, so that he would writhe in agony. Sigyn, his wife, his loving, faithful wife, could not bear the sight, and therefore she sat in eternal vigil with a cup, capturing the venom. And as the cup almost reached overflowing, she would quickly turn aside and cast it on one side. In that moment, of course, the acid drips onto Loki's face with extreme agony, and his writhing and screaming is equated with the earthquakes that we've seen in Italy recently. These eruptions that occur in nature. Right. Now, just to follow that up, this is very, very quick. We go to the provings. And this is important. This is a proving from Nancy Herrick's book. It's important in the light of the myth, and probably in the annals of homeopathy. There is no story so clear as an indication and a verification of Jung's concept of the collective unconscious. Because the story of Loki comes out of the collective unconscious of the Norsemen. And this dream comes from a woman who had taken laclupinum with no knowledge of what she was taking and no knowledge of the myth. How many of you here know of that Loki myth? of his death, of his eternal punishment at least. Is there anyone? No. This is the dream. Someone came to visit with test tubes of poison. All is disarray, and some were close to spilling. I was inside a salmon-colored bathroom. He is holding the poison rack above me. I told him I didn't want it dripping on me. I was afraid my face would be etched in acid. Some chemicals dripped on the floor. There were bubbles and puddles, creamy and yellow-pink. I was a frustrating mess, and I had to clean up without getting any on me. Where in hell's name does that come from? That's what myth is about. That's what dreams are about. I'm sorry that I had to curtail it and concertina it for you. But if only I can give you that gem. And the second gem that you must remember is that when there is repressed anger, red is all to do with repressed, constricted anger or bled away energy. The wolf is often exhausted, and there is this imploded energy. Have a look at the rubric. Odin, Wotan, I didn't get as far as that. The Valkyries. Oh, so many nice things to tell you about. Look at him hanging in there. And the Enneagram, which covers 9. The chakra system. Ailments from suppressed anger gives to you almost a collage of the major remedies that are similar to laclupinum. Red, carcinosin, laclupinum, lycopodium, staphysagria, aurum, natmura, ignatia, sepia, that group which we've spoken about, the hardening, causticum. And look at this, quercus. That is what I was going to speak about with Thor. Quercus, the oak, is sacred to the god Thor. Thor was the one who caught Loki. Here we have anger, suppressed anger rubric. Secondly, agaricus. Agaricus was the substance that the Vikings took before going into battle. It gave them that battle fury and enabled them to fight as they did. Germanium. Germanium is the remedy that even has the guilt of the German people within it. The Nordic and the Germanic tribes, and the energy and the last World War, many other world wars. Chamomilla colocynthus, the anger infantile form. Hepar sulph, fire, red. Anacardium and lysine, all in that group. It's a story that needs a whole weekend to speak about. I've just touched on it briefly, but if I can just give to you the realization that you're dealing with a remedy which is manifold. It is so complex, it has many facets, and it can assist you and assist other remedies to do their work. It stands shoulder to shoulder with carcinosin in this role. It's a blessing. Use it. Thank you.